In March 2013, the body of 42-year-old David Carter was discovered at the base of the grand staircase inside his Houston home. What initially seemed like a tragic accident quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. As investigators pieced together the final moments of his life, they uncovered a tangled web of deception, betrayal, and a marriage built on lies. 6 years earlier, in February 2007, a seemingly innocent romance began at a charity gala in downtown Houston, one that would ignite a series of events leading to a violent confrontation that no one saw coming. At 7:30 a.m. on a cold Wednesday morning, the quiet suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas, stirred awake to the sight of flashing red and blue lights. Police cruisers lined the driveway of the two-story Carter residence, their presence disrupting the usual calm of the upper-middle-class street. Officers stepped onto the frost-kissed lawn, their boots crunching against the frozen grass. The call had come in less than an hour earlier. A distressed neighbor had phoned emergency services, her voice shaking as she reported loud crashing sounds and shouting from the house next door the night before. It wasn't the first time she had heard arguments from the Carter household, but this time had felt different, more violent, more final. When she woke up that morning and saw that the porch light was still on, the curtains still drawn, and no sign of movement inside, an unsettling feeling crept over her. That's when she called the police. When the officers pushed open the unlocked front door, they were met with an eerie stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The warmth of the central heating was at odds with the lifeless energy inside. The ticking of a wall clock somewhere in the living room echoed in the silence, each second stretching endlessly. A faucet was still running somewhere in the house, the sound distant but distinct, dripping into the heavy air like a quiet metronome of something left unfinished. Then they saw him. At the base of the grand staircase, David Carter, 42, a well-known businessman, lay motionless. His body was twisted in an unnatural position, his face turned sideways against the cold marble floor. Blood had pooled beneath his head, forming a deep crimson stain that had dried overnight. His skull was visibly fractured from the impact, his once neatly combed hair now matted with dark streaks of congealed blood. His arms were spread slightly, fingers curled as if they had been reaching for someone, before his body gave out. The officers didn't speak for a long moment. They had seen fall cases before, but this wasn't just a fall. Something about the scene was wrong. Too much violence, too much evidence of struggle. Their eyes moved across the entryway, scanning the signs of a fight that had unfolded in the house hours before. A broken vase lay in shattered pieces a few feet from the body, its fragments littering the polished floors. A chair had been knocked over, the wood slightly splintered at one of the legs, as if someone had grabbed onto it in desperation. There were fresh scratches along the walls, deep grooves where fingernails had clawed at the smooth paint. Near the banister, smeared along the polished wood, was a single bloody handprint, but it didn't belong to the victim. By the time forensic analysts arrived, the scene had become a puzzle waiting to be solved. Photographs were taken, evidence carefully collected. The staircase was measured, the angles of the fall noted, the pattern of blood spatter analyzed. Every mark, every detail would have to be accounted for. Was this an accident, or something much darker? While investigators worked, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Where was Isabel Carter? The answer came 2 hours later, when an officer spotted a woman sitting alone in her car, parked at a nearby lot just a few streets away. The engine was off, but she sat completely still, hands resting on the steering wheel as if she had been gripping it for hours. When the officer approached, she made no attempt to run, no effort to resist. Instead, she stepped out of the car with an eerie calm, her movements slow, controlled. She was dressed in the same clothes she had worn the night before, a long-sleeved blouse, black pants, but her hair was disheveled and her face bore the marks of a sleepless night. Her name was Isabel Carter, age 38, David's second wife. She was brought to the station for questioning on March 8th, just 2 days after David's body was discovered. The moment she entered the interrogation room, detectives exchanged glances. There was something off about her. Most people in her situation would be sobbing, shaking, pleading their innocence. But Isabel, she was composed. Too composed. Her expression was unreadable, her voice steady, as she answered each question with a cold, factual precision. She spoke about the events leading up to David's death as if she were reciting a report rather than discussing her husband's violent end. She admitted to being in the house that night. She did not deny that there had been an argument. She even acknowledged that there had been a fight. But when pressed for details, she simply said, "It got out of control." What got out of control? How? Who pushed first? She did not say. Forensic evidence was still being processed, but investigators already suspected this was no accident. The angle of David's fall, the bloodstains, the handprint on the banister, it all suggested a violent altercation rather than a simple stumble. As the days passed, the investigation unearthed secrets that David had hidden for years. His marriage to Isabel had not been what it seemed. In fact, it hadn't even been real, at least not in the way she believed. Isabel thought she was David's only wife, but as detectives dug deeper into his past, it became clear that David had been living a double life, and Isabel had found out. The truth behind David Carter's death was no longer just about a fall down the stairs. It was about betrayal, lies, a secret life unraveled. By March 20th, the pieces of the puzzle had finally come together. Forensic reports confirmed that the handprint on the banister belonged to Isabel. The bruises on her arms, the marks around David's wrists, the scratches along his neck, all signs of a deadly struggle between a man and a woman who had once shared the same bed. When they arrested Isabel for murder, she did not cry, she did not protest. She simply nodded, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. She had told the truth about one thing. It had gotten out of control. In February 2013, as the sun dipped below the Houston skyline, the air inside Isabel Carter's home felt unusually heavy. The scent of simmering pasta filled the kitchen, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh basil, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, drifting in the comfortable rhythm of her life, a life she believed was whole, a life she believed was real. Then her phone buzzed, its vibration rattling against the counter. A simple notification, a tiny interruption in an otherwise peaceful evening. But as her eyes settled on the message, the warmth of the moment shattered instantly. It was a number she didn't recognize. The words on the screen felt foreign, wrong, like a message meant for someone else, yet somehow aimed directly at her heart. "You don't know me, but I'm Sarah Carter, and I think we need to talk." Her hands tightened around the phone, the device suddenly feeling too heavy, her pulse thudding in her ears. The name, Sarah Carter. It meant nothing to her. And yet something deep inside twisted, painfully. An instinct, a warning, a whisper in the back of her mind, telling her that whatever this was, it wasn't good. She read it again and again. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was a mistake, some random woman, a wrong number, a joke. But the more she stared at it, the more the unease burrowed into her skin, making her restless, paranoid, and cold. For the first time in years, she felt afraid of what she didn't know. By the next morning, on February 4th, 2013, she had given in to the curiosity that gnawed at her. She responded. She agreed to meet. They settled on a small cafe on the outskirts of Houston. the kind of place where people went to have quiet, forgettable conversations. A place where secrets could be shared and then left behind, swallowed by the constant murmur of espresso machines and idle chatter. When she arrived, she saw Sarah immediately. She hadn't known what to expect, but something about Sarah's presence felt unsettling. She sat calmly, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, watching Isabel approach with an expression that was neither hostile nor welcoming. It was something else entirely, something cold. There was no accusation in Sarah's posture, no visible resentment. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't demand explanations. Instead, she placed a stack of documents on the table, her fingers resting lightly on the edges like someone handling a fragile truth. Isabel barely registered the words spoken between them. Her heart pounded too loudly in her ears, but the moment she saw David's name on the marriage certificate, reality slammed into her like a freight train. She reached for the papers with unsteady hands, flipping through them as though she could somehow change what was written. Marriage license, bank statements, proof of a mortgage, photographs. It was all there. Her entire life reduced to a cruel joke. She felt like she was suffocating. Sarah never raised her voice. She spoke with the kind of certainty that crushed whatever hope remained inside Isabel. Every word was deliberate, controlled, as if she had already processed the pain of the truth long before she ever decided to confront her. By February 5th, 2013, Isabel's entire world had unraveled. She had spent the night in her car, parked outside her own home, staring blankly at the windshield as memories of David played like a broken film reel in her mind. Their wedding, their anniversaries, his whispers of love, the way he would kiss her forehead before leaving for another business trip. All of it had been a lie. She should have known. The late nights, the sudden disappearances, the way he always seemed distracted when they were together. But how could she have ever imagined this? The thought that he had never truly been hers, that she had been a mere extension of his deception, made something in her mind snap. She wasn't sad, she wasn't devastated, she was furious. By the time David came home on February 6th, 2013, Isabel was waiting. The house was dark, except for the glow of a single lamp in the corner. A bottle of whiskey sat on the table, half empty, a glass untouched beside it. David barely had time to remove his coat before she tossed the marriage certificates onto the table. The tension thickened instantly. He didn't deny it, and he didn't try to explain, and instead he sighed as if exhausted by the fact that she had finally found out. That was the moment she realized. He never thought she was smart enough to figure it out. His arrogance cut deeper than the betrayal itself. She wanted him to deny it. She wanted him to fight for the lie, to beg, to explain why he had done this to her. But instead, he only reached for his phone. She watched in confusion as he dialed a number, pressing the device against his ear. And then, the moment the other end of the line picked up, Isabel felt her blood turn to ice. Sarah's voice. "She knows everything." That was what David said. Sarah didn't sound surprised. She didn't even sound concerned. She had known. She had known all along. By February the 7th, 2013, Isabel Carter understood the full weight of her reality. She had never been a wife. She had been a side project, an experiment, a place where David could escape to when he needed something new, something thrilling. He had played them both. And then, when it became inconvenient, Sarah had stepped in to help clean up his mess. The way they spoke, so casual, so calculated, made it clear. This wasn't two women caught in the same betrayal. This was a betrayal they had been complicit in together. Sarah had given him time. She had let him have his second life, and when it became too risky, she had orchestrated its collapse before Isabel could make the first move. And David? He had never feared losing Isabel. He had only feared what she might do once she found out. By February 8th, 2013, Isabel stopped feeling like a person. She became something else entirely. The madness crept in slowly, one thought at a time. How long had they laughed at her? How long had they sat together, sharing the knowledge of her humiliation? How long had she been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game? Sarah had been composed at the cafe, but had she laughed when she got home? Had she told David, "I told you she wouldn't handle it well"? Had she been pitying her? Or worse, had she been enjoying it? The rage coiled around Isabel's spine like a vice, tightening until it became unbearable. She wouldn't cry, she wouldn't scream, but she wouldn't let this end the way they thought it would. David Carter had spent years controlling every detail of his life, every detail of hers. By February 9th, 2013, she decided it was time to take control back. The night of March 5th, 2013, was suffocatingly silent inside the Carter home. A deep, unnatural silence, the kind that only comes before something terrible happens. The air was heavy with unspoken words, unshed tears, and a storm that had been brewing for far too long. At 11:42 p.m., the last argument of their marriage began. Isabel had spent hours pacing the dimly lit living room, her mind spiraling into a place she had never been before. The knowledge of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, had festered in her like a sickness. The idea that she had been nothing more than a foolish, disposable distraction gnawed at her. She felt trapped in a life that was never real. She knew David would be home soon. She knew he would walk in like he always did, with that confident arrogance, as if he was still in control of everything. And she knew that tonight she would not let him win. When the door finally creaked open, the air between them shifted. The house wasn't the same anymore. Neither was Isabel. She had waited for him in the darkness, sitting in the same spot where she had confronted him weeks ago. The bottle of whiskey, once a numbing agent, sat untouched on the table. She didn't need it anymore. David knew immediately. He saw it in the stillness of her body, in the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides, as if ready to claw through the night itself. He had always thought she was too fragile to fight back, too emotional, too weak. But now she was looking at him like a woman who had already made a choice. At 11:45 p.m., the first strike landed. The rage inside her had been waiting for an escape. A vase shattered against the wall. The crash sent a shockwave through the house, as if the walls themselves recoiled from the violence. David moved first, closing the distance between them in an instant, grabbing her by the wrist. His grip was strong, the same way it had always been, the way he used to guide her, own her, control her. This time she ripped herself free, and the fight erupted like an earthquake. Furniture toppled as they moved across the room in a violent blur. A chair cracked against the floor. A framed photo crashed onto the carpet, glass splintering into 1,000 tiny pieces. David was stronger, he always had been, but Isabel had something else now. She had nothing to lose. At 11:48 p.m., he shoved her hard against the wall. The force of it sent a jolt of pain through her spine, stealing the breath from her lungs. Before she could recover, his hands wrapped around her throat. His grip tightened slowly, deliberately. It wasn't desperation, it was punishment. For a split second, her vision blurred. The dimly lit room darkened at the edges, the air in her lungs thinned, the pressure crushing against her windpipe. At 11:49 p.m., the world slowed. Everything inside her screamed for survival. The thought of dying in his hands, becoming just another one of his forgotten mistakes, his buried secrets, his discarded possessions, it ignited something deep, something primal. Her nails dug into his skin, leaving jagged red marks across his arms. He barely flinched. Her free hand reached blindly, fingers searching, grasping. Then she found it. The lamp. The heavy ceramic base was cool against her palm as she swung blindly, feeling the impact before she even registered what had happened. It hit his cheekbone with a sickening thud. He stumbled, stunned, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. At 11:50 p.m., Isabel gasped for air. Her throat burned, her pulse roared in her ears, but she had no time to think. David recovered too quickly. His face twisted in something beyond rage, beyond hate. It was the look of a man who had lost control for the first time, and he couldn't stand it. He lunged at her. She moved first. Her elbow drove into his ribs, a desperate, wild strike fueled by something deeper than strength, a lifetime of betrayal, of being fooled, of being played. David staggered back, 2 steps too many. For the first time in their years together, he lost his balance. Behind him, the staircase waited. 1 step. His foot missed the edge. 2 steps. His arms flailed, reaching for something to anchor him back to the world he controlled. But there was nothing left to hold on to. For the briefest moment, their eyes met. At 11:51 p.m., David Carter fell. The descent was silent. His body twisted mid-air, arms grasping at the emptiness, his expression frozen in shock. Not because he was falling, but because it was Isabel who had done it. The impact came hard and fast. His skull met the marble floor with a sound Isabel would never forget. A sickening, hollow crack. For a moment she stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring down at the motionless shape below. The room hummed with silence. The clock in the hallway ticked forward. The wind rattled the windows. But David didn't move. His body lay twisted at an unnatural angle, a pool of blood slowly expanding beneath his head. His fingers, once so sure and commanding, curled slightly, lifeless. Isabel waited for him to move, waited for him to sit up, shake off the pain, throw another lie her way, another threat, another command. But he didn't, because David Carter was dead. At 11:52 p.m., Isabel realized she had won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of everything. By 7:30 a.m. on March 6, 2013, the silence inside the Carter home was shattered by the arrival of the police. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the driveway, their presence unnatural in a neighborhood where everything was always meant to be in perfect order. Officers stepped through the open door, their boots echoing against the cold marble floor, past the toppled furniture, the shattered lamp, and the dried blood that had soaked into the cracks of the staircase. David Carter's body had gone stiff overnight, his once powerful presence reduced to nothing more than a lifeless shape sprawled at the base of the stairs. His face was frozen in a twisted expression, his eyes still slightly open, staring into nothing. The weight of his final moment still lingered in the air. They found Isabel sitting on the living room floor, her back against the wall, her knees drawn to her chest. She hadn't run. She hadn't tried to clean up the scene. She had simply waited. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, too calm. She told them the truth. It was self-defense. He had attacked her. He had nearly killed her. She had fought back. But there was no way to hide the evidence that betrayed her. Her fingerprints were everywhere. On the banister, on his clothes, on the shards of broken glass. His blood was on her hands, not metaphorically, but literally. The scratches along his arms and neck, the bruises already darkening on her skin, all told a story of chaos and violence. Forensic teams documented every detail while detectives listened to her version of events. But no matter how much she spoke, there was one undeniable fact: David was dead, and the law would decide whether she had the right to take his life. By March 8, 2013, the case had already begun to take shape. The whispers had started. A successful businessman, a respected man, dead at the hands of his wife. That was the story the world was starting to believe. And when the prosecution needed a voice to confirm it, they found one in Sarah Carter. Sarah had always played her role flawlessly. The devoted wife, the grieving widow, the woman who stood by David, even in death. When she spoke about Isabel, she painted her as the woman who had ruined everything. The reckless mistress who lost control. The second wife who never should have existed. By March 20th, 2013, Isabel Carter was arrested for second-degree murder. She sat in the back of the squad car, staring through the window, watching as the house, her house, their house, disappeared behind her. David had built that house. David had built the life inside it. And now, David was gone. For days, she felt nothing. But when April 2nd, 2013 arrived, an envelope slid through the small opening of her cell door. A single letter. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, a familiar scent. She unfolded it carefully.
Sarah's handwriting, precise, sharp, final. "He loved me, not you, and I will make sure the world knows it." She laughed, because in the end, they had both been fools in David's game.
But now, the game was finally over.
Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates. And check out another insane case we have. Just married wife goes missing on dream honeymoon cruise in the Caribbean. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comments.